Haridas Thakur, of the name Haridas Thakur, Shakara, of the branch, Adbhuta, wonderful, Charita, characteristics, Tina, 3, Laksha, 100,000, Nama, names, Tenho, He, Layana, chanted, Apatita, without fail. Translation: the 20th branch of the Caitanya tree was Haridas Thakur. His character was wonderful. He used to chant the holy name of Krishna 300,000 times a day without fail. Purport: certainly the chanting of 300,000 holy names of the Lord is wonderful. No ordinary person can chant so many names, nor should one artificially imitate Haridas Thakur's behaviour. It is essential, however, that everybody fulfill a specific vow to chant the Hare Krishna mantra. Therefore, we have prescribed in our society that all our students must chant at least 16 rounds daily. Such chanting must be offenceless in order to be of high quality. Mechanical chanting is not as powerful as chanting holy names without offences. It is stated in the Chaitanya Bhagavat Adi-lila chapter 2 that Haridas Thakur was born in a village known as Budana, but after some time came to live on the bank of the Ganges at Pulya, near Shantipur. From the description of his chastisement by a Muslim magistrate, which is found in the 11th chapter of the Adi-lila of Chaitanya Bhagavat, we can understand how humble and meek Haridas Thakur was and how he achieved the causeless mercy of the Lord. In the dramas performed by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Haridas Thakur played the part of a police chief. While chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra in Vinopala, he was personally tested by Maya Devi herself. Haridas Thakur's passing away is described in Adi-lila of Chaitanya Caritamrita, 11th chapter. It is not definitely certain whether Haridas Thakur appeared in the village named Budapa. So that's where Prabhupada earlier said that, didn't he? Born in a village known as Budana, named Budana, that is in the district of Kulana. Formerly this village was within a district 24 parganas within the Satakskira division. Text 44. There was no end to the transcendental qualities of Haridas Thakur. Here I mention but a fraction of his qualities. He was so exalted that Advaita Goswami, when performing the Shraddha ceremony of his father, offered him the first plate. The waves of his good qualities were like those of Prahlad Maharaj. He did not even slightly raise an eyebrow when persecuted by the Mohammedan ruler. After passing away of Haridas Thakur, Lord himself took his body on his lap and he danced with it in great ecstasy. Sri Vrindavan Das Thakur vividly describes the pastimes of Haridas Thakur in his Chaitanya Bhagavat. Whoever has remained undescribed, I shall try to explain later. Or whatever has remained undescribed, I shall try to explain later in this book. Durgave Perimendasya Skalapatika Tirmuhuyus Pakripaistadamina Shantu Shunta Lambanama Makinat Mrandasya Nanjana Salakaya Chaksurun Militam Yena Tasme Shri Gurave Namaha. So these 5 slokas that we're discussing today are to do with Haridas Thakur. So at the outset I prayed for the mercy of all the Vaishnavas so I can actually do justice to the glories of Haridas. Haridas is the Namacharya. Lord Caitanya said he's the Namacharya of the holy names, that he chants the holy names 300,000 times daily. He chanted names, and that constitutes 192 rounds a day. And while he was chanting, he was actually absolutely relishing the nectar. Not only was he just chanting the sound vibration, but he was experiencing Krishna on his tongue while he was chanting. So sometimes we don't do pranams to Haridas, but we used to, when we do the pranams, we used to say Namacharya Haridas Thakura Ki. I just remembered when I said so. It's nice to keep that there, just to understand the Acharya. Acharya means the one who sets the standard for many, many, many generations of devotees. So pranams to Sri Haridas. So to understand more about Sri Haridas, one way is we can delve into who Haridas Thakur was in his last life. We go back to Krishna's pastimes. So in Narottam Das's song regarding this, in Narottam Das, he has a wonderful song called Savarana Shri Gaura Mahima, which translated is the glories of Shri Gauranga. And in it he sings that one who accepts the associates of Lord Chaitanya's Nitya Siddha is elevated to the spiritual world to associate with the Supreme Lord. One should know that Gaura Mandala Bhumi is not different from Raj Mandala, it's Vrindavan. There is no difference between the inhabitants of Vrindavan and the inhabitants of Gaura Mandala Bhumi, which is Sriram Mayapur. So the Leela of all the devotees who are associated with Krishna all those devotees who did associate with Krishna again appear in Caitanya Leela. So if we understand that is a glorious understanding of Vaishnavas and the devotees of Krishna. So therefore we begin with Sri Krishna when he was here in Vrindavan, and he was a little boy, 5-year-old boy, looking after the calves, not only a few calves, but many, many, many calves with many, many, many cowherd boys that used to go into the forest. Now Lord Brahma wasn't certain, but he thought that Krishna was Narayan. I don't know if it was not written in the scriptures or something. There was a little bit of bewilderment on Brahma's part. So he came to the earth planet just to observe this little boy. And as he was looking at him, he was herding all these cows in the forest, and all of a sudden there was this huge serpent by the name of Aghasura. Now the Aghasura serpent, this black serpent, was a demon, and it was Aghasura, and he was feared not only on this earth planet by the demigods also, who used to actually shudder at the name Aghasura because he could take any shape he liked. So at this particular point in time he took the shape of a black snake 8 miles long with jaws protruding almost mountain high, and he positioned himself next to a mountain. And all the cowherd boys saw this. They said, we haven't seen this before. This is really weird, this foul smell coming out of his mouth. But let's go inside and have a look, shall we? We haven't been here before. So thinking, hey, this is Vrindavan. You know, so many wonderful things in Vrindavan. And before Krishna could do anything, all the cowherd boys went right inside, 8 miles long. Right? All the cows, all the cowherd boys right inside Aghasura. And then Krishna, of course, said, well, I'll have to go in and look after the boys. So he went inside, and when he went inside, this big jaws, huge jaw, just snapped shut. Finished. So Lord Brahma was looking, and then while he was looking, all of a sudden the jaws opened up again, and Aghasura was gasping for air. He was choking, and he choked. And Krishna expanded himself, bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. All the cowherd boys had passed away due to the fumes of Aghasura, and he killed Aghasura and then revived the boys. So when Aghasura died, Lord Brahma was watching, and the soul of Aghasura actually left the body, and he was hovering around. So all the boys actually left the snake, even they come out. Wow, that was heavy. A bad experience. They're all coming out with the cows, and Krishna came out last. So when Krishna came out, then the soul of Aghasura merged into Krishna's body. So he achieved impersonal liberation. So Lord Brahma was watching this, so he's thinking, this is really my worshipful Narayan, but let's just see what happens after this. So then Krishna went off with the cowherd boys to the bank of the Yamuna, and they had lunch. So they're having this picnic, so all the boys, they bring out their lunch boxes, right? And they've got all these beautiful preparations that their parents have cooked for them. And they're taking a bite, and then if it's really, really nice, then they say, hey Krishna, try this. They bite something and put it in Krishna's mouth. Now Lord Brahma was horrified. He said, what is this? This is uchista. This is against Vedic injunctions that you don't eat something and give something to some other person to eat. That is considered contaminated food. So all these boys are doing this, and Krishna's taking it and he's eating it, and he's got sweet rice coming out of his left hand. We know about the left hand, the traditional left hand. So he's saying, what is this? Is this really Narayan? Can this be my worshipful Narayan? So he became a little bit bewildered, so he said, let's do a test. So what did he do? He took all his calves away, all the cowherd boys' calves and all Krishna's calves, and he hid them in a cave. And when the boys finished eating, they go, where's the calves? Where are they gone? Krishna said, don't worry, I'll find them. So he goes off into the forest looking for the calves, and he couldn't find them. He comes back and all the cowherd boys are gone. So Krishna then understood, this must be Lord Brahma doing this, because Lord Brahma put him to sleep and put him in a cave. And then he temporarily went away for a few seconds, it said. He went back to Brahmaloka for a few seconds, but by the time he'd gone back to Brahmaloka and come back again, one whole year had passed. And in that time, he come back and he looked, and there's all the calves and there's all the cowherd boys. He said, how is this? And he went straight to the cave, had a look, and there they were, asleep. And he come back again to the fields, and this time instead of seeing calves and cowherd boys, he saw four-handed forms of Narayan. Many hundreds of thousands of forms in calves and cowherd boys. That was his worshipful Lord, his one worshipful Lord. Now it expanded into many Narayans. And of course Krishna had just expanded himself as the cowherd boys and the calves. And it was a lila. It was actually a very nice lila, because all the people, all the parents and all the mothers of the calves got to have Krishna as their son. So then they were in complete ecstasy, and then Lord Balaram smelled something fishy. He said, how come all these cowherd boys, when they come home, that the parents are actually more interested in their sons than interested in you? Because previously when Krishna would go away, everybody's heart be broken until Krishna came back. When they saw Krishna, they were so much in ecstasy. How can they serve Krishna? They'd do whatever they could, feed him food, give him clothes, wipe him down. They were just, Krishna was their life and soul, but now they were more interested in their own children. Krishna, what have you done? And then Krishna said, well, Lord Brahma stole all the cows, so I had to manifest myself as the cowherd boys and the calves. So when Lord Brahma saw this, he became totally bewildered, and he realised he made a really big mistake. So then he went to Krishna and he apologised profusely. But Krishna, in his form as a cowherd boy, said, never mind, Lord Brahma, it's okay, we can all take this into our stride. So then Lord Brahma was forgiven, but still he felt so bad. He felt very, very, very bad. So he went to Antadweep, which is one of the 9 islands in Mayapur. And he started to meditate on the Supreme Lord. And while he was meditating, Krishna again manifested to him in his golden form. And he said, Lord Brahma, you've already been forgiven. Why are you performing these austerities? So Lord Brahma actually saw Lord Caitanya, and he said, I've never seen this wonderful form of yours. Where does it come from? He said, I haven't manifested yet. It's going to manifest in a short period of time after I finish my pastime in this Dwapara Yuga. I'm going to appear in Kali Yuga. And Lord Brahma prayed for the benediction, said that, can I please take part in your pastimes when you do come in your golden form? And he also, when Lord Caitanya of course said yes, he said, I have one more benediction to ask of you, that as Lord Brahma I'm very puffed up most of the time because I'm prestigious and I have this sort of air about me of importance. So let me please take birth as someone who's totally insignificant and unimportant. Let me have a birth where I don't have any authority or any prestige. So that was granted. So when Lord Chaitanya's pastimes arrived, Lord Brahma took birth in a Muslim family. And it says here, Prabhupada states here, Srila Prabhupada was quite, first of all he states that he was born in Budana in district of Kulana, and then right at the end of the purport it said he may have been born there, it's not certain, so but it certainly dwelt on that name, because actually Budana, I think it's taken as the place where Haridas has been born, and it's in Bangladesh. It's just over the border of Bengal, West Bengal, and it's a place of pilgrimage. There's a temple there, certainly an auspicious place. Some devotees have been there. Anybody been there? Bengal, Bangladesh, a bit hard these days. So he was born there. But Lord Brahma was a devotee, and there's no talk of his youth or anything like that, just that we know that, I mean, yeah, he was born as a devotee, Haridas Thakur, and Haridas Thakur immediately became a devotee of Krishna. He was born in a Muslim family, but we have to understand there was 3 categories in those days. There was the Muslims, there was the Hindus, and the Hindus were part of the caste that the Brahmanas were in charge of the Hindu society. It was a very rigid society. Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Sudras, and everybody had their own designation. And the worship, of course, Hindus, they were very much influenced by Sankaracharya at that point in time, so there was the air of impersonal Brahman being the ultimate goal of life, which is part of mukti, liberation. And of course the other Vaishnavas believed that mukti was the ultimate liberation, taking birth in the Vaikuntha planet. So that was the Hindus, and the third category was the Vaishnavas, the worshippers of Krishna, and they were quite rare actually. So Haridas, he was an exemplary Vaishnava, and he incessantly chanted Krishna's names, 300,000 names, 192 rounds a day. And he relished the names so much that he'd chant them loudly, proclaim the glories of the Lord, and he also preached, because when one chants the names of the Lord loudly, gets the nectar, then he feels the compassion. So the compassion welled up inside him, and he began to preach the glories of Krishna's holy names. So wherever he went, he'd be preaching. So the Brahmins of the Hindu community didn't really accept him because he was a Muslim, so he's an outcast. How can he do this? And the Muslims, of course, didn't accept him because he'd become a Hindu. So Haridas was like on the fringe of society. But he went from place to place preaching. In one particular place, it's called Adu Saptagram, he was lecturing on the glories of Sri Hari, Supreme Lord, and a lot of people came. And he attracted 2 Vaishnavas. This is before Lord Chaitanya's manifested his pastimes. The Vaishnavas' names were Balaramacharya and Yadunanda Acharya. We do have a Yadunanda here following in the footsteps of Yadunanda, or he was here on stage. So and they heard the glories coming from of the Lord, Supreme Lord, coming from Haridas's mouth. They were enchanted. That they accepted him as a true Vaishnava. They didn't look at his designation or his caste. And they informed Raghunath Das Goswami's father, who was living close by. And he was a very, very wealthy man. He had so much wealth. It's not certain if Raghunath Das had been born at that point in time or was just a very, very, very small boy. So Raghunath Das's father became very enchanted also, and he asked him to speak in his place, and he invited all his servants, his staff, his friends, and all the assembled Brahmins from the village to come and hear Haridas. So Haridas spoke about the glories of the Lord, how it was the ultimate goal of life, how it surpassed all the different forms of liberation, different forms of mukti, and he was quoting the Shastras and also interspersing that with his own realizations of the love of Krishna. So one prominent Brahmana who came there, he was like the head Brahmana, he couldn't tolerate this anymore, he'd had enough. His name was Gopal Chakravarti, and he just stood up and he said, How is this that you're quoting all this all this nonsense, saying that you are saying that this chanting of Hare Krishna, this simple chanting can even surpass mukti, and we know mukti is attained by the study of so many Vedas and the performance of so many penances and austerities, and you're just saying this chanting can surpass all that. If you were right, if you were wrong, that's one thing. But if you were wrong, I'll cut off your nose. And everybody was aghast. What is going on? This guy stands up. Everybody's in ecstasy hearing about the holy names of Krishna. This guy saying, cut off your nose. Of course, Haridas Thakur replied, said, well, if I'm wrong, I'll cut off my own nose. Okay. And the whole meeting sort of became really disturbed. People became disturbed with the meeting, and all the Vaishnavas apologised. I'm so sorry that this happened, that this wasn't meant to happen. And Haridas said, no, that's okay, it's just a misunderstanding. He sort of misunderstood the Shastra, he shrugged it off, he wasn't offended at all. And of course we know the story is that Brahmana that offended Haridas there, he got leprosy very, very soon after that, and you know what happened? His nose fell off. So then, of course, he was so much aggrieved, he came to Haridas and he begged forgiveness. Of course, Haridas was quite liberal with his mercy. He was merciful to all the living entities. He could see Krishna in the heart of all living entities, and he saw the illusion in everybody, and he just wanted to help them get back on the path of Krishna consciousness. So there are a few wonderful stories about Haridas. There was that one, and then he moved on to a different place where he was staying in a cottage in another province, and we have that famous story of the prostitute that once again, wherever he stayed, he attracted people who wanted to listen to his philosophy, and then as soon as he started speaking, the Brahmins would start up, who is this Muslim here speaking this philosophy? How can he speak? And he's actually putting mukti down. What is this devotional service? What is this bhakti? And then they complain. So these particular set of Brahmins complained to the local zamindar, whose name was Ramachandra Khan. And he became furious too. How dare he insult the Brahmanas? Let's stitch him up in our terms. We'll frame him. So he got the most attractive prostitute from his province or his palace or whatever, and he said, I want you to go and defame Haridas. So she dressed up in her most alluring clothes, and then she went to see Haridas while he was chanting his rounds all by himself. So then she expressed a desire to be with him and associate with him, and Haridas goes, "Yeah, that's fine, okay, but I've got a problem here, I've got to finish my rounds." Didn't tell how many rounds he was chanting. "So just sit there and when I finish my rounds, then I'll fulfill your desires." So he's chanting and chanting, of course, 192 rounds. That takes quite a while. By all calculation, it takes between 16 to 18 hours a day, somewhere, if you... They're around there, so it doesn't leave much time. It leaves a few hours for a bit of sleep and then taking some prasadam and you chant again. So Srila Prabhupada says, don't try and do it. We're not in a position that we can emulate Haridas Thakur. We have had devotees that, 64 rounds in itself is a very difficult thing. You may be able to do it once or twice, but to do 64 rounds every day and then multiply that by 3. So anyway, the prostitute fell asleep, and when she woke up he was chanting the next day. "Oh, you fell asleep, I'm sorry. Well, I'll have to start chanting again. If you can wait today, for sure, we'll have this union." So then once again she's waiting, and after a couple of occasions she became attracted to the holy names herself, and so she began to chant also. And just hearing a pure devotee chant the holy names and the ecstasy of the holy names, she became purified in her own right. And then she actually renounced everything. Instead of going back to her position as a courtesan in a palace, she actually gave away all her possessions, shaved her head and became a disciple of Haridas's. And then she began to chant 192 rounds a day. And so when that happened, Haridas moved on. He left her there chanting that position. He moved on another place. So he moved to a place called Pulinagram, which is what Prabhupada says here is Kulina. Yeah, Kulinagram. So it's about a bank to the Ganga. And of course Haridas was chanting and dancing. It was close to Shantipur, and then of course he came under the attention of Advaita Acharya, who noticed him. And when they met, it was a beautiful, wonderful meeting, because actually Advaita Acharya was an incarnation of Sadashiva. So he's partially Lord Shiva and partially Lord Vishnu, and Haridas an incarnation Lord Brahma. So there was this beautiful spiritual meeting, and then they were pretty much inseparable for a while. And they were chanting the holy names and spreading the glories of the Lord. And of course Advaita Acharya was a very much accepted leader of the community. Now we're in Shantipur, there's Vaishnavas in the community, there's also Brahmanas there. And Srila Prabhupada mentions in the next sloka that one day Advaita Acharya he was performing a Shraddha ceremony. Shraddha means in honour of your forefathers, and it was a very elaborate ceremony. He invited everybody to come, and all the Brahmins were assembled there. And apparently in the Shraddha ceremony, have you ever been to one? You know the full-on Shraddha ceremony. So after the ceremony you offer the prasadam to the most prominent spiritually advanced person in the assembly. So Advaita Acharya had no qualms about offering it to Sri Haridas Thakur, and he offered to him. And of course the Brahmins go, "What? What is this? He's offering to a Muslim? How can this be?" And of course this is where it comes, that caste Brahmin consciousness, and that's what's actually helped to subvert this whole Varna Ashram Dham society in India, because actually the Brahmanas are so rigid that no one can actually take birth in a Brahmin family unless you're born in it. So therefore you can't become qualified to become a devotee of the Lord unless you're a Brahmana. Of course, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, had a lot of trouble with these Brahmanas, and he spoke one time. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he was very young actually, Bhaktivinoda Thakur asked him to speak at this assembly. Bhaktivinoda, of course, that's Bhaktivinoda, his father. And it was a debate between the Brahmins and the Vaishnavas. When Bhaktisiddhanta spoke, he spoke about the Brahmanas at length, and the Brahmins were also happy. And then he spoke about the Vaishnavas, and he spoke so eloquently about the Vaishnavas that it actually put all the Brahmanas to shame for their philosophy. But at one stage they were so anti-Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati that they plotted to kill him in Vrindavan. Remember that they were going to stone him? And I forget what happened, but that issue was avoided. So that animosity was still there. So imagine the animosity towards Haridas Thakur. So that started to gather momentum around Shantipur. So the community was outraged. Why is he chanting so loudly? We know that the prayers should be uttered silently and secretly. If they chant loudly, they lose their potency. And how is he qualified to chant all these mantras? He's not from our caste. So then they took this problem to the Nawab, who's like the Zamindar. And the Nawab also became very furious that, what is this Muslim? What's this? Someone who's born a Muslim has become a Hindu. Call them Hindu. Right? This is unacceptable. So they summoned Haridas and they brought him before the Nawab. And Nawab said, this is just not acceptable what you're doing. You're in great danger. Now, if you forget this Hindu religion and you practice your own religion, we'll let you go. Otherwise, you're going to receive severe chastisement. And Haridas told the Nawab that he had no capacity to stop, that he loved Krishna so much, I love Krishna so much that I just can't stop chanting. It's just it's on my tongue. It just can't stop. And as such, I've got to show this compassion to others. This is why I chant so loudly. It's like, there's come Jiv Jago, Gaurachandra Bole, that wake up sleeping soul, wake up sleeping soul. So that is the nature. That's what we sing as Vaishnavas, that we want to wake up all the sleeping souls who are just fast asleep in the lap of which called Maya. So, and Haridas tried to expound this philosophy to the Nawab. He became madder still. He said, right, seeing as you're not going to recant, then you have to face your sentence, that your sentence is going to be a death sentence. But just to give an example of how a Muslim should not become a Hindu. Of course, in that point in time, they were trying to make all the Hindus Muslims. They were doing all these ridiculous things like sprinkling water on the head and say, all right, I'm a Muslim, I sprinkle water on your head now, you've been contaminated, so you can't be a Hindu anymore, so you have to become a Muslim. I go, oh my gosh, I have to become a Muslim. So this was the culture, the acceptance of, it was almost like a superstition, right? So the Muslims were all right to do that, but if a Muslim became a Hindu, that was a great offence. So because of that, he said, I'm going to make an example of you, we're going to beat you in every marketplace until you're dead. So it was a very heavy sentence. So we got two heavy thug executioners who expend all their energy, and they literally dragged Haridas from one market to another place, beating him with sticks and severely beating him. And they beat him so much that they were almost exhausted, and they noticed that actually Haridas was just looking at him with compassion. He wasn't looking at, they were insulting him, throwing all sorts of, every insult they could find, but he was still looking at him with compassion. And in up this 22nd marketplace, they said, you should be dead by now. How is it that you haven't died? We're going to be in trouble with the Nawab because we haven't killed you. And Haridas, out of his compassion, said, well, if that's troubling you, then I will die. So Haridas had the capacity to stop his life heirs, so he stopped his life heirs, he stopped breathing. So all intents and purposes, he was dead. And then they tried to lift the body, and they couldn't lift the body. They tried to take him back to the Nawab. They couldn't lift the body, no matter how many people were there, it was so heavy. And that was another trouble in itself. So they said, what are we going to do? and we're in trouble with Nawab again, so Haridas made himself light, and they said, what are we going to do? We'll give him to the Hindus. Said the Hindus didn't want him. No, he's a Muslim, but he's chanting your holy names. No, we don't want him, he's Muslim, we can't give him the rights of fire where he's burnt up in the fire. And so they said, well, he's a Muslim, we'll give it to the Muslims. They said, oh, we don't want him desecrating the earth by burying him, we're not going to bury him. So they threw him in the river. And actually the river, you know what the river was? It happened to be the Ganga. So that's a really glorious way for Vaishnavas to die. But he didn't die, he just floated down the Ganga and he went to Shantipur. He floated down to Shantipur, and when he went to Shantipur, he revived, his consciousness became revived, he came out, and what did he do? He just kept chanting Hare Krishna. Again, he started chanting Hare Krishna. And not only that, he went back to that place where the Nawab was. And when the Nawab saw that here he comes chanting Hare Krishna again, he was absolutely overcome with guilt and grief and shame, and he rushed out and he actually embraced Haridas Thakur and apologised profusely and realised what a great saint he was. So this is the life and precepts of Haridas Thakur. Later on, when Lord Caitanya came, Lord Caitanya worshipped him greatly, and one point in time when he was in Navadweep, he manifested all his pastimes to his devotees. For Murari Gupta, I think he took the boar incarnation. For another devotee, haven't read up lately, he became Sabudraj, he showed all his different wonderful forms of Krishna. And when he summoned Haridas Thakur, he actually showed him all the welts on his back. He said that when they were beating you, it was I was taking all the pain. So Haridas didn't feel the pain. Lord Caitanya had all these marks on his back. He said, I took this for you. Now please ask for a benediction. So Haridas was very, very unwilling to receive any benediction. He said, I'm such a lowborn. In his role as Lord Brahma, I'm so lowborn that actually I don't even deserve to be here, but if there's any benediction I'm going to receive, could I please just have the remnants of all the Vaishnavas from my prasadam. So that was his request to Lord Caitanya, unwillingly as it was. That was his boon that he asked for. So when Lord Caitanya moved to Jagannath Puri, he took sannyas, Haridas Thakur went to Jagannath Puri also, and he lived there. There's a certain spot, I think we've all been there, all people have been to Jagannath Puri. There's a very famous samadhi where Haridas performed his pastimes, and Lord Caitanya used to visit him regularly and bring him Jagannath Prasadam. And there was the sequence where Prabhupada actually says here that Lord Caitanya was personally was there for Haridas Thakur's passing away, and that's described in the Adi-lila 11th chapter of Caitanya Caritamrita. So I won't go too much into the passing away, we're running out of time, but it was a beautiful sequence where Haridas could no longer chant the holy names 192 rounds a day, and he blamed his body, or he blamed his mind, not his body, but it was actually very, very weak. And he said to Lord Caitanya, actually I know that you're going to leave soon, you're going to finish your pastimes up, so could I please wind up before you finish your lila here on this earth plane, because I don't want to be here for that. So Lord Caitanya come back the next day, and then then Haridas took hold of Lord Chaitanya's feet, looking in his eyes, he passed away in that manner. And as Prabhupada says here, Lord Caitanya took him in his arms and danced wildly, chanting the holy names, and then they put him in the sea and they put him to rest. So that was the glories of Haridas Thakur. So, does anybody have any questions or comments, or would they like to add something, another pastime? We have a couple of minutes. Yes.
It's very nice and completely comprehensive. We covered everything.
Covered everything. Not quite. The glories of Haridas Thakur are unlimited.
Just here, Prabhu, you're mentioning the guard beating like anything, and it's described as, apparently my understanding, this pastime happened before the Chaitanya's appearance. Before the and it's described that Caitanya in the spiritual world was getting his Sudarshan chakra ready to kill these two guards. But he wasn't able to summon Sudarshan because while he was trying to do that, Haridas Thakur was praying for the deliverance of these two people who were beating him up. So even though they were beating him severely, he had full compassion for them on a spiritual level, and in that way the Lord wasn't able to chastise them as well.
Thank you for that esoteric story. I've heard that before. Any other? Prabhupada also mentions about the Mahadevi herself came to test Haridas. Does anyone know that story? Maybe they can relate that. Anyone?
Very similar to that one.
That's a different person. No? No takers? Okay. So, even Mahadevi was impressed by Haridas, and Mahadevi is very hardly impressed by the living entities at all. She just wants to keep them trapped in the material world. So we emulate the mood of Haridas and take to the chanting holy names of Krishna. The more we chant, the more Krishna comes closer to us. There's a connection there. So when we start, sometimes we just have pleasure out chanting names of Krishna. Everybody, big smiles down the village yesterday, watching the smile on people's faces while I was singing Sari Ra and chanting Hare Krishna. So everybody had a smile on their face. So that's the initial stage, but as the chanting progresses, then the heart begins to melt and we start to develop that attraction. So therefore Haridas is the Namacharya. We're following in the footsteps of Haridas. So if we glorify Haridas, we might get his mercy. We done? Okay. Jai, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.